Oh, what did I just do? Oh, it is recording. Okay. All right, just making sure. Now I got to go back to this and change it again. Let's try this again. All right, now I think we're finally ready to start. So what we're going to do today is show you a different way to solve these quadratics, but we're going to use the completing the square thing to come up with a formula. Now, I could just sit here, just show you the formula, this is how you use it, and go on our merry way. But I would feel really bad if I did that because I want to show you where this formula comes from. We just spent a lot of time, last 2 or 3 days, talking about quadratic equations and completing the square. I want to really show you what this really comes down to. And it comes down to, let's see, do I even have this in my notes? Oh, here it is. Okay, it comes down to this. So what we're going to do, we'll call this the quadratic, not equation this time, but we're going to find the quadratic formula, which means we're going to be able to take any quadratic and plug it into the quadratic formula and come up with an answer. For some people, they love the quadratic formula. They hate completing the square. They love the quadratic formula, and they would rather put it in there. Some people find the quadratic formula kind of difficult, hard to memorize, and they would just rather complete the square. But I'm giving you options on this, okay? Maybe on a quiz or a test, maybe not, though. I might ask you specifically on a quiz, solve this quadratic by completing the square, okay? And then I might say solve this quadratic by using the quadratic formula, okay? So you do need to know how to do both of them. But what we're going to do, and we alluded to this yesterday as you guys were leaving, we're going to take this, which is our quadratic equation, and we are going to solve for x. We're going to solve for x. Now, you can write this down if you want, or if you just want to sit and watch, you can watch. But this is not going to be on a quiz or a test. I'm just showing you where this formula comes from, okay? So, first thing we're going to do, pretend the a, the b, and the c were actual numbers. So what would we do if these were actual numbers? What's the first thing we would do? I'd probably take that c, put it on the other side, wouldn't you? So let's do that. But then we're going to put a plus and a what? A blank. And then if you put that c over here, what does it become? It becomes negative c. So far, so good, right? Everybody good? Remember, the a and the b and the c are just numbers, all right? But they're not numbers. They're letters. They're variables. But we're treating them as numbers. What's the next thing I would want to do here? Let's get rid of the a, right? Always get rid of that number out in front. We just did a problem like that with the 3. Remember, we divided everything by 3. So guess what we're going to do here? We're going to divide everything by a. All right, let's see what we get. This a cancels out with that one, so I get x squared plus. Now watch what I'm going to do here. Do you see how I have a b over a? I'm going to write it like this, b over a, and then put the x out in front. It's the same exact thing, just looks a little nicer. Plus blank equals, and this is negative c over a. All right, so I divided everything by a. Now I'm ready to complete the square. So now I got to figure out what's going to go in here. So I'm going to do a little work off to the side. What do I take? I take that middle coefficient, and then I do what to it? I do 2 steps. Divided by 2, and then square it. So I'm going to go b over a. Now instead of dividing by 2, since it's a fraction, what do you think I'm going to do? Multiply by 1/2, right, the reciprocal. Everybody with me so far? Nothing new, right? Except the a, b, and the c are letters instead of numbers now. It's the only thing different. Now this looks a little ugly, but let's see what we do. If we multiply across here, what do I get? b times 1 is b. a times 2 is, we wouldn't say a2, what would we say? 2a. But what do we have to do with that? We got to square it. Okay, so now let's square it. It's pretty easy. b squared is just b squared. Okay, and then we got a 2, and that's being squared. What's that going to be? It's going to be a 4. Well, 2 squared is 4, though, right? And then we put a, we got to square that as well, so we put a squared. So that's what's going to go in this blank right here. It's a little more complicated, But it's almost a little easier because you don't have to worry about actually multiplying real numbers together. You just stick them next to each other. Do you agree? So what's going to go here? B squared over 4a squared. What's the next thing I always say? I can't always what? That's right. I can't just add it to the left side. I also have to add it to the right side. B squared over 4a squared. Now we're ready to complete the square. Okay, all that work so that I could put my parentheses and I could put a big squared on the outside. What goes in the first spot? Right. What's my sign going to be? Plus. It's from this one right here. So I put a plus. Now, how in the world do I find this? One or two ways. I could just take half of b over a, or I could take the square root of all this right here. Which one do you want to do? Just take the square. You want to take half of it? That's fine. So what's b over a times a half? We already did it over here. B over 2a, isn't it? So this is b over 2a. All right? So I took that crazy looking thing, completed the square, and I got that. Now that's a perfect square. Here's the hardest part, maybe the hardest part of the whole entire thing. I got to add these two up. So I'm going to do it right here. I want to find a common denominator. What's my common denominator? It's going to be a 4a squared. What did I do to a to get 4a squared? What did I multiply it by? Well, I multiplied by another a to get the a squared, and I also multiplied it by a what? A 4. So I multiplied this by 4a. So what do I get? I get minus 4ac. This one I didn't have to do anything. It's the same denominator, so I don't have to do anything to the top, so I just put plus. Now when I said I didn't do anything, technically you're multiplying by 1, but in reality you really didn't do much to it. All right, I know that was a little complicated, but it was just adding fractions. All right, now I've lost you, right? You were with me until then. What I'm going to do now is this. Now again, this is not going to be on a quiz or a test, but it's fun to do. I'm just going to put that, I'm going to put this right here, but I don't like that b squared on the right. Okay, I always like the squared stuff in front. Is that all right? So I'm going to write b squared minus 4ac. And that's all over what? 4a squared. Okay? A couple more steps, and we're going to get something. We're going to get something practical. Okay, I'm doing this for a practical reason, because I'm going to come up with a formula that I'm going to be able to use. And hopefully, maybe, maybe not, I'll be able to show you how to use the formula today. I was hoping to. We might have to wait till tomorrow. But let's continue. You're used to this, right? Okay, so what's the first thing I get rid of now? That's squared. Okay, I get rid of it by doing what to it? Square rooting it. Okay, so I square root that. You know that goes away, right? And then I got to square root this whole thing, but I got to put what out in front of it? The plus or minus, right? This is coming back to you, isn't it? Now we're back on track. Looks familiar. And now I got to get rid of this plus b over 2a. How do I get rid of the plus? I subtract it. So here's what I got. We're getting there. I get minus b over 2a. How did I get that? I subtracted it from both sides. Now this stuff right here, I'm going to go plus or minus. What am I going to do here? I tell you what, let's just do it right here. I'm going to break it up into the square root of the top, square root of the bottom. So the square root of the top is going to be this. That's supposed to be a squared, b squared. And then what's the bottom going to be? It's going to be the square root of 4a squared. Let's just do that in our head. No, let's not do it in our head. Let's write it down. We'll do it and we'll put it down here. Okay? Everybody see what I just did? I got a fraction. It's under a square root, so I just put the top under a square root and I put the bottom under a square root. That's all I did. But now you can't really simplify the top, so I'm going to keep the top the same. I'm not going to mess with that. But I am going to mess with the bottom. What's the square root of 4? It's 2. What's the square root of a squared? It's just a. We're kind of done, but what I like to do, they have the same denominator, don't they? So here we go. We are finally ready to write the quadratic formula. This may be your first time. I don't know. You should have done this in Algebra 2. But if you didn't, does anybody recall doing quadratic formula? Okay. So you should recognize this, hopefully, if you took Algebra 2. It's going to be negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac. And that whole thing is over what? 2a. That, I was going to circle it. Let's put it in a box. Oops, that's not my box. This is the box. There we go. That right there is the what? Quadratic formula. We have 5 minutes. I think we'll be able to do a problem with this. Now, where did this come from? This came from ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, didn't it? So we took that and we did completing the square and we came up with that as our answer. So let me show you a practical use for this. Let me see. Yeah, let's do this one. Okay, here we go. Here's a practical use for the quadratic formula. So what if I ask you to solve for this? Now, first thing I would do, if I didn't tell you how to solve for it, I would see if it factors. Well, it doesn't factor, okay? It comes out weird. Or you could use completing the square, okay? If you wanted to complete the square, you could and get an answer for x. But we're not going to today. We're going to do the quadratic formula. So I'm going to stick it in this formula right here. You're like, what in the world? How am I going to remember that? Well, you do it enough, you write it down enough, you'll remember it. So we got A's, we got B's, we got a C. So where do I get that A, B, and C from? Like, which one is the A, B, and C here?
3.
The 3 is the A.
5.
It's not just a 5, it's a what?
-5.
It's a negative 5, right? That's the B. And then the 1 is the C. Everybody see that? So it's just plug and chug. That's why a lot of people like this formula, because you just plug it in. That's what my professor in college always said, plug and chug. So you just plug it in here and work it out. That's the chug, all right? It's a terrible expression. I like it. I always remember it. Plug and chug. So let's do it. Let's go back to white. X equals, let's scooch it up. I'll put it right there so we can see the formula. So what is the formula? What's the quadratic formula? What I would do, here's a suggestion. If you want to learn this formula, every time you have a homework problem where you have to do one of these problems, I would write the formula every single time. Don't just write it at the top and just refer to it. Because if you write it every single time, you're going to remember it better. Everybody hear that? Take my word for it. It works. So write it every single problem so that you can memorize it. This has to be memorized. It looks crazy. It looks weird, but you need to memorize it. Okay, let's do it. I don't have enough time. X equals negative B. So it's the opposite of what B is. Well, what is B? B is negative 5. But what's the opposite of negative 5? It's positive 5. So I put a positive 5 there. You could put minus negative 5 if you wanted to, but that's kind of a mess, isn't it? Plus or minus square root B squared. Let's go back to the B again. Negative 5. What if I square that? What do I get? 25. Minus a 4 times an A and then times a C. What is the A? It's 3. What is the C? It's a 1. All that is over 2 times A. 2 times A. What is the A? It's a 3. Now, that's the plugging, right? We plugged everything in, right? Now we chug, okay? We do the work. So let's simplify. This is what some people don't like to do. This is what some people like to do. So let's do this. It's 25 minus, right? Because this is all going to be minus. What do we get inside here? 4 times 3 times 1. It's 12 over 6. That wasn't too hard, was it? We're not done, though. We're almost there. 5 plus or minus. What's inside of here? 25 minus 12, which is 13. It's under a square root. And that's all over top of what? 6. That right there is your answer. Do you like that better than completing the square, or would you rather complete the square? I think most people would like to use the formula. Most people. Yeah, you just plug it in, and then you simplify. That's all it is. There's a lot less steps, okay? You just plug it in. Problem is, you got to know what the formula is, right? If you don't know the formula, then you're stuck. So you got to memorize the formula. So memorize, where I'm going to write that, right here. Memorize this formula right here. Write it down a bunch of times. If you get bored, there's nothing to do, and you're doodling, doodle the quadratic formula, okay? I've actually done that. I shouldn't even tell you this, but back in the day, I'd be in church, and sometimes, every once in a while, there'd be a real boring sermon, and I was like, ugh, can't stand it. So I start writing stuff. I would actually write the quadratic equation, do the work, and come up with the formula. That cured it, man. I was on fire after that. All right, I'll give you some stuff to do tomorrow. Yeah, I'll give you some stuff to do tomorrow. I'm not going to give you homework tonight.